I've always believed that buildings and relationships share something important. They both need solid foundations. For 16 years, I thought our marriage was built on bedrock, something unshakable and permanent. My name is Marcus Reed, and I restore historic buildings for a living. There's something magical about taking a structure that's weathered centuries of storms and breathing new life into it, preserving its soul while ensuring it stands for generations to come. I guess that's why the irony of what happened still cuts so deep. I could save centuries-old buildings from collapse, but I couldn't see the cracks forming in my own marriage until it was too late. Vanessa and I met during my first major restoration project, a Victorian library that had been neglected for decades. She was completing her graduate studies in art history and often came to sketch the intricate woodwork. I noticed her immediately. Not just because she was beautiful, with her dark curls and bright inquisitive eyes, but because of how she looked at the building. Most people saw the peeling paint and broken windows, but she saw past the damage to the beauty beneath. We bonded over our shared appreciation for preservation, for seeing value in things others might discard. We married a year later, and I spent the first 2 years of our marriage restoring a dilapidated Victorian in Cambridge to create our family home. Every doorknob, every floorboard, every inch of crown molding, I poured my heart into that house, creating a perfect space for the family we wanted to build together. When Emma was born, we painted her nursery together. 3 years later, we did the same for Noah. Those were the happiest years of my life. As my restoration business grew more successful, I took on bigger projects. Boston has no shortage of historic buildings needing careful hands to bring them back to glory, and my reputation for meticulous work meant I was never short of clients. I was proud of providing well for my family, of creating something meaningful with my hands. Vanessa built her own impressive career too, eventually becoming a tenured professor of art history at the university. She had a gift for making art accessible to her students, for helping them see the stories behind the brushstrokes. Sometimes I still can't believe she chose me. 16 years, 2 amazing kids, and she still lights up a room in a way that makes me feel like the luckiest man in Boston. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I can see how gradually we began to drift apart. It wasn't a sudden break, but a slow separation, like how water seeps into a foundation, freezes, and expands, creating cracks so fine you'd miss them if you weren't looking for them specifically. I was busy with back-to-back restoration projects, often working late, sometimes even weekends. Vanessa had her classes, her research, her museum committee work. Where we once spent evenings discussing our days over wine, we now passed like ships in the night, leaving notes about the kids' schedules and quick texts about dinner plans. I didn't see it as a problem. This was just life, just what happens when 2 busy professionals build careers. We were stable, comfortable. I thought comfort was enough. The first warning sign came on a rare evening when we were both home early. I was in my home office reviewing blueprints when I overheard Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen. She was talking to a colleague about possible summer research opportunities in Europe. "That would be amazing," she said, her voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in some time. "Those European art tours were my favorite when I was married." She caught herself then, quickly correcting to, "since I've been married." It was such a small thing, a slip of the tongue, but something about it lodged in my mind like a splinter. When we were married. Not since we've been married. As if our marriage was something in her past. I tried to shake it off. People misspeak all the time, right? But that phrase kept echoing. When I was married. I started noticing other things too. New clothes that were more stylish than her usual comfortable professor wardrobe. More attention to her appearance. More late nights at faculty events that she was oddly vague about when I asked. When I tried to discuss these changes, wondering if something was bothering her, Vanessa just smiled and said I was being paranoid, that I was projecting my stress from work onto her. Maybe she was right. My latest project was particularly challenging, a historic church with structural issues that had been improperly addressed by previous contractors. I'd been working 60-hour weeks trying to fix the damage without compromising the building's historical integrity. One evening, hoping to reconnect, I stopped by her office on campus to surprise her with dinner. I heard her laugh before I saw her, a bright, genuine sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. Through the partially open door, I saw Vanessa standing near her desk, leaning slightly toward a man I didn't recognize. He was younger, maybe early 30s, stylishly dressed with the kind of effortless good looks that make men like me feel instantly inadequate. They were standing close, looking at something on her desk, but their body language suggested a familiarity that made my stomach tighten. When I knocked, Vanessa looked up, momentarily startled before composing her features. "Marcus, what a surprise," she said, stepping away from the man. "This is Ethan Harlow, our new assistant curator at the University Museum." Ethan extended his hand with a confident smile. His handshake was firm, but there was something in his eyes. A subtle challenge, maybe, or simple curiosity about the husband he'd heard about. "Pleasure to meet you," he said. "Vanessa has been invaluable in helping me navigate my new position." I recognized that look. It was the same way I once looked at Vanessa when I was trying to win her heart. Only now I was the obstacle, not the suitor. We ended up having a polite, awkward dinner in her office, with conversation that never ventured beyond surface pleasantries. Driving home alone that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. That night, I sat alone in my home office, surrounded by architectural plans for buildings I was saving, while my own house felt increasingly empty despite everyone still living in it. While I'd been meticulously restoring historic buildings, I'd failed to notice the deterioration of my own marriage's foundation. The next few weeks were a blur of mounting evidence I couldn't ignore. Vanessa was increasingly distracted, our conversations hollow. She began rescheduling our rare date nights due to, quote, departmental emergencies that seemed suspiciously frequent. One afternoon, I needed to check our shared calendar for an upcoming parent-teacher conference and used Vanessa's laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen counter. That's when I saw it. An email notification from Ethan with the subject line, "Missing you already." I knew I shouldn't look. I knew that respecting her privacy was important. But the fear that had been building in me overrode my better judgment. I clicked. What I found was dozens of messages between them spanning the past 3 months. Messages filled with inside jokes, deep personal conversations, and thinly veiled romantic overtures. They discussed books, art, music, all the things Vanessa and I used to talk about, but hadn't in years. They shared dreams and frustrations. Most painful were Vanessa's complaints about feeling invisible in our marriage, about how she'd become just another fixture in our beautifully restored home. "With Marcus, I feel like a beautiful painting he restored years ago and now just walks past without noticing," she wrote in one message. "With you, I feel seen again." That hit me like a physical blow. Was that true? Had I stopped seeing her? I thought back to our early days, how we'd stay up talking until dawn, how I noticed everything about her new earrings, a change in how she styled her hair, the subtle shifts in her mood. When had I stopped paying attention? I closed the laptop, feeling sick. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I tried to save what was crumbling, to apply the same care to our relationship that I gave to my buildings. I arranged a special dinner at home, sending the kids to friends' houses for the night. I cooked her favorite meal, opened a bottle of the wine we'd discovered on our 10th anniversary trip to Napa. I asked about her research, really listened to her answers, shared stories from my own work. For a few hours, it almost felt like before. The evening ended with us making love, and for a brief moment, I thought we'd found our way back to each other. But afterward, lying in the darkness, I felt Vanessa silently crying beside me, her back turned away. When I reached for her, she flinched slightly before composing herself. "I'm just tired," she said. But we both knew it was a lie. A week later, I discovered Ethan was receiving an award at the Museum of Fine Arts annual gala. Vanessa had mentioned attending a faculty event that evening, but had been vague about the details. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway, telling myself I needed to know for certain, to see with my own eyes what I feared in my heart. The museum was transformed for the evening, the grand hall filled with Boston's art community in formal attire, champagne flowing freely. I spotted Vanessa immediately. She wore a deep blue dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled elegantly. She was radiant in a way I hadn't seen in years, laughing and animated as she stood with Ethan by a display of Renaissance art. They weren't doing anything explicitly inappropriate. No kissing, no obvious physical contact, but the way they leaned toward each other, the private smiles they shared, the complete absorption in their conversation told me everything. I stood frozen, watching my wife light up for another man. Then came the awards presentation. When Ethan was announced, he made his way to the small stage. During his acceptance speech, he paused and looked directly at Vanessa. I want to thank Professor Vanessa Reed for her guidance and belief in my vision when others couldn't see it. Vanessa, would you join me up here? The room applauded as my wife, blushing but pleased, made her way to stand beside him. Her insight into not just art, but life itself has been transformative, he continued, his hand lightly touching the small of her back in a gesture that seemed practiced, familiar. Something in me snapped. The careful restraint I'd maintained crumbled all at once. I moved through the crowd until I stood at the edge of the stage. Transformative, I repeated, my voice carrying in the suddenly quiet room. That's an interesting choice of words. Vanessa's face drained of color as she spotted me. Marcus, what are you doing here? I came to see my wife, I said, aware of but beyond caring about the spectacle I was creating. I didn't realize I needed an invitation for that. What followed was the kind of public confrontation that people remember for years afterward. Heated words exchanged, accusations made, Vanessa's angry tears as she hissed, "You see me now only because someone else does." That's when it hit me. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was being forced to see how I'd already lost her long ago. One missed dinner, one canceled vacation, one unnoticed haircut at a time. The scene ended with Vanessa leaving with Ethan, while I stood alone in a room full of strangers who had just witnessed the collapse of my marriage. 2 days later, I moved out of our Cambridge Victorian into a sterile, high-rise apartment downtown. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, from warm wood and detailed craftsmanship to cold steel and glass, from a home built with love to a space that held no memory or meaning. Vanessa filed for divorce within the week, citing irreconcilable differences. The day I went to collect more of my belongings, I found my wedding ring left on my dresser with a note that simply said, "I'm sorry we couldn't restore what we had." The children reacted as you might expect. Emma, our 15-year-old daughter, with cold anger directed mostly at me. "You were never really here anyway," she said when I tried to explain the situation without vilifying her mother. Noah, at 13, withdrew into himself, spending hours with his headphones on, shutting out the world that had suddenly become unpredictable. My work suffered too. For the first time in my career, I missed deadlines. I made careless errors in plans that my team had to correct. My business partner, Alex, finally confronted me after I missed an important client meeting. "You can't keep living like this," he said, his concern evident. "You're too busy staring at what collapsed to see what's still standing." One evening, sitting alone in my apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, I stared at the historic buildings I'd helped save throughout my career, their lights glowing warmly against the darkening sky. I've spent my life preserving other people's history, I realized, while letting my own future slip away. Have you ever realized too late that you've been taking someone for granted? Share your experience in the comments below. Maybe you'll help someone else recognize what's happening before it's too late. The next few months passed in a fog of legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and awkward exchanges during kid handoffs. I went through the motions of building a new life, buying furniture for my apartment, establishing a routine for when the children stayed with me, trying to regain my focus at work. But inside, I was still designing renovations for a house I no longer lived in, still trying to understand how I'd missed the warning signs. 6 months after moving out, I ran into Vanessa at a parent-teacher conference for Noah. We sat side by side in uncomfortable plastic chairs as his teachers discussed his struggling grades and increasing withdrawal. Afterward, in the school parking lot, an unexpected conversation changed everything. "Ethan and I aren't seeing each other anymore," Vanessa said quietly as we walked to our separate cars. I was surprised by both the information and her offering it unprompted. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "Don't be," she replied. "It burned bright but faded fast. Turns out passion without foundation doesn't last." She paused, keys in hand, looking at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "I didn't leave you for him, you know. I left because I felt invisible for years. He just helped me see that I deserved more." Her words stayed with me for days afterward. Rather than feeling vindicated by the failure of her relationship with Ethan, I was struck by the truth in what she said. She deserved more attention, more presence, more partnership. And I hadn't given her those things, not for a long time. I began to understand that while infidelity broke our marriage, my neglect had weakened its structure long before Ethan arrived on the scene. This realization didn't make the pain disappear, but it did something more important. It gave me somewhere to direct my energy besides anger and self-pity. I started rebuilding my life with the same methodical care I give to historic structures. I found a small apartment in a restored brownstone, one with character and history that felt more like a home than the sleek high-rise. I created a dedicated space for Emma and Noah, letting them help decorate so it would feel like theirs too. I reorganized my work schedule to be present for their events, soccer games, art exhibitions, school plays, without fail. And I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under blueprints and business meetings. I started sketching again, something I'd loved in college but had abandoned as impractical as my business grew. I joined a recreational soccer league, making new friends who knew me as just Marcus, not one half of a failed marriage. One afternoon, my assistant Sophie, who'd watched my struggle with quiet support, brought me coffee as I reviewed plans for our newest project. "You seem better," she observed. "More present." I nodded, realizing she was right. "I spent my career saving buildings because I understood their value from the beginning," I told her. "I failed to do the same with my marriage because I assumed it would always stand strong without maintenance." A year after the separation, I received an award from the Boston Historical Society for my work restoring the old church, the project I'd been so consumed with when my marriage began falling apart. Standing at the podium, I saw my children in the audience. Emma was actually smiling at me, a rare gift these days. And in the back row, surprisingly, was Vanessa. She'd come to support the kids watching their father's achievement, a gesture of the co-parenting relationship we were slowly, painfully building. "Restoration isn't just about preserving what was built in the past," I said in my acceptance speech. "It's about understanding that even the strongest structures require constant care to remain standing. I've learned that lesson too late in some areas of my life, but it's a principle I'll never forget again." Afterward, Vanessa approached with the children. "Congratulations," she said sincerely. "The church looks beautiful." "Thank you for coming," I replied. "It means a lot to have you all here." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no hints of rekindling our relationship. That chapter was closed. But there was something like peace beginning to form in the space between us, a foundation for a different kind of relationship. Not husband and wife, but two people who once loved each other deeply, now finding a way to honor that past while accepting its end. I still love the woman I married, but I've come to understand that love isn't just about the grand design. It's about daily maintenance, noticing the small cracks before they become structural failures. Some buildings can't be saved, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to preserve what matters most in our lives. What do you think? Can a relationship be restored after trust is broken, or are some damages beyond repair? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love, betrayal, and the difficult journey of rebuilding. Because while my story doesn't have the happy ending I once imagined, it's taught me something invaluable about the architecture of relationships, that the most beautiful restorations often come after the most devastating collapses.